Hey everyone, we all know the Beatles, right? Or at least we think we do. They're probably one of the most famous, most beloved bands in history. But what if that clean, happy story we've all been told isn't the whole picture? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain and go beyond the legend. So I'll ask you, how well do you really know them? I'm talking beyond the hit songs, beyond the screaming fans. There's this whole other story of grit, of conflict, and some pretty surprising truths that actually forged the music we all love. Let's dig in and separate the myth from the real story. I mean, this is the image that pops into your head, isn't it? The matching suits, the mop-top haircuts, those charming smiles, the Fab Four, a perfect, unified force that just completely took the world by storm. And look, it's an incredible image, but it's also, well, it's a carefully crafted piece of marketing. To really get it, you gotta go way back to the beginning. And their story doesn't start under the bright lights of London or New York. Nope. Their sound, their entire vibe, was really forged in the smoky, rough-and-tumble clubs of Hamburg, Germany. See, long before they were these global icons, the Beatles were basically a house band in Hamburg's red light district, the famous Reeperbahn. As historian Julius Sneeringer says, this place was a zone of pleasure where people came to just let loose. Yeah, not exactly the squeaky clean image they'd later sell to the world, right? Get this, 1,100. That's how many hours they spent on stage during their time in Hamburg. It was an absolutely grueling apprenticeship. We're talking hours and hours on end, night after night, often in what used to be a strip club. They were honing their sound, their stamina, everything. This is where the Beatles really, truly became a band. All right, so that's the origin story myth busted. But there's another myth, and this one hits right at the music itself. Turns out, for millions of people, especially in America, the Beatles albums they knew and loved weren't the real Beatles albums at all. So here's the deal. In the UK, the Beatles and their producer, the legendary George Martin, they were obsessed with crafting their albums as these complete works of art. Every song had its place. But over in the States, Capitol Records basically saw them as a cash cow. They just butchered the track lists, threw in some singles, and rearranged the whole thing to squeeze out more albums to sell. It was all about maximizing profit, not art. And this slide just shows you how crazy it was. Take the UK album Help. It had 14 great tracks. But to get all of those same 14 tracks in America, you would have had to buy three separate records. You'd get the US Help soundtrack, which was padded out with orchestral filler, plus you'd have to buy Beatles VI and the American version of Rubber Soul. I mean, good luck trying to afford all that with your allowance money. Okay, let's get even deeper into the music now and tackle another huge myth, that the Beatles' sound was, just simple pop music. The truth is, it was so much more complex, and you can really hear that in the drumming of Ringo Starr, who's probably one of the most underrated drummers of all time. So this music analyst, Aaron Kurowick, he dug into it and found that Ringo's style was anything but simple. He often used this really clever hybrid technique called the metronomic rock beat. Think of it like this. He'd keep this super steady, almost machine-like pulse going with his foot on the bass drum while his hands were playing a classic rock pattern. It creates this unique tension that just drives the songs. And once you know what you're listening for, you start hearing it everywhere. It's the foundation of Honey Pie. It's what pushes the chorus of Yellow Submarine along, and it gives that powerful build in the bridge of Hey Jude. It's his signature. But wait, there's more. Ringo didn't just stop there. He also used what's called a syncopated metronomic beat. So again, he's got that steady pulse with his foot, but now his hands are playing these funkier, more complex rhythms that kind of dance around the main beat. It's an incredibly slick and creative technique. And here's the really brilliant part. He wasn't just doing one trick per song. In Ticket to Ride, for example, he totally switches it up. He uses that complex syncopated beat for the verses, but then for the bridges, he slams into this powerful, straight-ahead rock beat. This wasn't an accident, you guys. He was using his drumming to tell a story and shape the song's entire emotional journey. It was just so smart. All right, and of course, you can't talk about Beatles myths without getting to the big one. The engine room of the band, Lennon-McCartney. Theirs is the most legendary partnership in music history, but the idea that it was this seamless, perfect collaboration, well, that might be the biggest myth of all. So, from the very beginning, John and Paul made this deal, this pact, to share credit on everything. Lennon-McCartney. It was a brilliant brand. But as the years went on and their lives went in different directions, their own memories of who wrote what started getting, well, a little fuzzy and a little competitive.
A perfect example is the absolute masterpiece, In My Life. In an interview in 1980, John Lennon was very clear. He said, basically, I wrote all the lyrics. Paul's contribution was the harmony and the melody for the middle part. A big deal for sure, but in John's mind, case closed. The song was fundamentally his.
But then you ask Paul McCartney about it years later, and you get a completely different story. He remembers John having the words but no tune. And Paul says he went off, wrote the entire melody, came back, and said got it. So you've got two geniuses, one iconic song, and two totally different stories.
And look, the point here isn't to play detective and figure out who was right. It's to show that this legendary partnership was a real, living, breathing thing. It was messy. It was full of collaboration, sure, but also competition and the kind of conflicting memories that happen when you create something that massive together. Okay, so that brings us to one last little surprise, a final myth-busting moment. Let me hit you with a pop quiz question. How many members of the Beatles are still alive today? The answer seems obvious, right? It's gotta be 2. The answer is actually 3. Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and, wait for it, Pete Best. Who's Pete Best? He was the Beatles' original drummer, the guy who sweated it out with them through all those hours in Hamburg. He was famously and pretty brutally replaced by Ringo right before they exploded. He's the often forgotten Beatle. So that leaves us with one final thought. After learning all this, the gritty beginnings, the corporate meddling, the musical genius, the creative friction, does knowing about all this messy reality make the music of the Beatles feel less magical? Or maybe does it make it even more incredible? For me, I think it makes what they accomplished even more astounding. But what do you think?